and welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Metal podcast. I am your host, Kiki, she, her, and today I will be hosting the podcast alone. PS hands her regards, though, and I do have a very cool guest today. Will you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Sebastian. I'm also known, or my pronouns are he, him, and I am also known as Sarcastic Fingers elsewhere on the internet. I'm the founder and also an instructor at Fractal School of Music, and I also stream live music on Twitch.
Yes, and that's where we know each other from.
Yes.
A lot of people here or our longtime listeners from the podcast should know that I have been streaming on Twitch for a few years now. I'm actually celebrating my second year anniversary this week.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a very interesting topic today, though. But maybe just also for a little bit of context, we met through Twitch Sings, didn't we?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did a few songs together even.
hmm
I remember now.
Good times.
Yeah, it flies. It's been gone for over a year, almost a year and a half now.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, the pandemic year of the pandemic 2020 was the last year Twitch Sings was active, and we've talked about that previously on the podcast as well. But it was, um, a game, a program, a software thing
hmm
uh, designed for Twitch streamers where you could sing karaoke. And the coolest was actually this feature of being able to sing with other streamers and with other people that were using it as well. And that is how we met each other. And I remember having a lot of fun with you on the songs. Because you are a very skilled and talented singer, and it was just amazing to meet people through that, and that some of the connections that we made back then stood the test of time, so to speak.
Yeah, you're too kind. And absolutely, that was a very cool program. I met a lot of cool people that I still know. It's too bad that they shut it down, but I know a lot of people are still like finding other ways to connect and sing together and do that kind of stuff, which I think is a testament to how those connections that people made.
Yes, yes, and we still show up in each other's chats, and
hmm
at least to say hi if we cannot sing with each other anymore.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, today we are talking about inclusivity, or, well, the lack thereof sometimes, in music. And we talked a lot about that here on the podcast from an industry, especially from the heavy metal industry side of things. And we have followed the women in metal for a long time. So we are big defenders, maybe, of the argument that we just need to see more women and LGBTQIA persons on festival lineups, on stages, but also behind the scenes in as booking agents and as managers and also sound engineers, etc., or at least give them more visibility because
hmm
we have been part of this scene forever
For sure.
and we have been part of music forever. And so today we want to take a step back a little bit and look at music not so much from the industry side, but also from the history, from the instruments and theory and all of that kind of amazing things that women have been doing for ages and centuries.
Absolutely.
What qualifies me to talk about it? Not much, really. I do have my bachelor's in musicology, but that's been ages since I have really used it, so to speak. I do have memories of different characters that we will talk about later on as well, that shaped or inspired and motivated me to think about them and to mention them and tell people about them. But what is your story?
Basically, I never intended to study music, actually. I wanted to be either a veterinarian or a doctor originally. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, I tell the story on stream a lot, actually. But somebody that I could sing. And I'd been one of those kids that, like, my parents had put me in piano lessons when I was young, but I had a good ear. So I never actually did the work to learn how to read music. Like, I just kinda, like, skated by pretending, and, that
Mhm.
was a really bad idea. I tell my students this all the time. It's like, "Hey, kid, like, if you really don't wanna learn how to read music, like, fine, and we'll work with that for now, but I recommend you do because you never know if you're gonna end up in music school." But, and then I ended up auditioning for scholarship. I was invited to, and I ended up getting the scholarship. So in order to get the scholarship, I had to be a music major. And I
Mhm.
studied music for a little while, and, not to like, divulge too many of my own personal details, but I'm non-binary and transmasculine, and,
Mhm.
I learned very quickly, throughout the process that, A, it's really hard to be, a person in music school who knows nothing about music, so that part was on me. But also that being a non-binary transmasculine person in a system that's, like, extremely, cis heterocentric and extremely Eurocentric, which was not a problem for me, because I am white, but, it is a problem for a whole lot of other people, was not
Mhm.
something that I was gonna fit into particularly well. So I ended up, dropping out of my music degree and, like, doing a whole lot of other stuff. I became a teacher later on after, like, several years, because I wanted to, essentially serve the students that fell through the cracks of traditional music education, and,
Mhm.
that's what I do now. So, yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes. Also, that is awesome because that you just well, it's not something I was planning on asking, but it is something that I have been wondering a lot about lately, or at least in the past few years, about what we do for work and whether it has a bigger purpose behind it.
Right.
Because I mean, all of us, or most people probably, go to work because we need to sustain ourselves financially, etc. But
Mhm.
how about we also do things that will make this a better world, a better planet?
Oh, absolutely.
And there are so many different ways to do that. And as you just pointed out, giving the people who, like you just said, fall through the cracks of this very archaic educational system,
Mhm.
giving them the access to the information that we should all equally have is very, very important.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, like, not to talk too much about, like, my music teaching, but there's so much that, like, the general consensus of music teachers, and, like, by no means is this everyone, because there's tons of amazing music teachers out there, but, like, higher ed music education and a lot of private music education, like, whether it be for kids or for adults or whatever, like, believing in all this gatekeeping and all of this, like, there are secrets, and, like, there aren't. You
Hmm.
know, everything, musical knowledge is not secret. You're not gonna, like, go somewhere and somebody's gonna tell you something that's, like, new information that nobody else knows.
Yeah.
It's all known information, so, like, I personally have this philosophy of, like, it's not, if you can't afford it, we'll work with you. If you can't, because to me, music is a joy, and everybody should be able to learn how to make music if they want to, especially
Yes.
now when so many of us are, it's hard to find joy in the world right
Hmm.
now sometimes. And so, like, I don't know, it's just like, it's one of those things that when I had those realizations over the course of leaving music school until now, I was just like, yeah, I need to do this differently. I can't do this the way that I'm seeing it being done,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's where I come from in this. And it's taken a long time and a lot of learning. And that was one thing that I did want to say at the beginning here is, like, there's going to be things that I say that may not be right, I'm sure. And, like, I'm always open to learning new things. I've learned
Hmm.
so many, like, there are things that I used to believe that I realized weren't true. And I think that we're always going to be learning things, especially as we look through history. And there was so much, I remember, like, in my classical music education, that I believed at first, things about being, like, the one right way, a lot of it, like, being like, "Oh, this is the right way to do this," and
Hmm.
then, like, looking
Yeah.
back at it later and being like, "Oh, well, there isn't one right way. That was just the way that I was
Yes.
told is the one right way," you
Hmm.
know? So, I think that that's a thing to always keep in mind for myself, at least, like, when I'm looking into stuff, to be like, "Okay, well, this is maybe one way. This might be an accepted way, but it may not be the only way," you know?
Yes, I can so relate. I can really relate a lot to that. And I think we should and we can take a few moments to discuss all of this because I see so many things about my own story or about my own history in what you just told us about yourself in a few words. And what you were saying about reading. reading notes.
Mhm.
Same.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I and also this whole thing about doing things the right way, and how elitist higher
Mhm.
musical education can be. Here in Germany, the system is also very strict, and from my experience in during my bachelor's, it was also very very gatekeepy, and
Mhm.
people wearing metal shirts would get the evil stares, and all of that kind of thing that can really discourage you. But also, the same music was a big part of, or has always been and is still a very very big part of my life, that plays a huge role in my emotions.
Mhm.
And right when I was writing my bachelor's thesis, I was finishing my studies, and I needed, a kind of a side job. I needed to make some money. And I started singing when I was around 15. And all by ear, I never properly learned to read notes, to read music. And then I wanted to do music journalism. I wanted to study music journalism, but I went to musicology instead because the test for the music college in Germany, where I wanted to start music journalism at, was too difficult, and I couldn't play the piano. I couldn't play any instrument really, and then I started musicology, and I went through those 3 years without ever properly reading music because I had really good friends who studied with me all the time. Anyway, but after that, I was looking for work, as I was saying, and I found this recording studio, and I just wrote them an email saying, "Hey, if you ever need a background singer or something, I'm looking for work." And they said, we don't do that kind of thing really, but we also have a music school, like a small music academy, and we are looking for a singing teacher.
Mhm.
Would you like that job? And I was like, I feel zero qualified for this, but I will meet with you. That's fine. And they had these alternative methods. So it was no problem that I didn't know how to read music. They even taught me all about these different methods about how to explain things through movements and colors, and so all of these different things. We still did the whole warming up with the scales on the piano. That much I can manage. But after that, yeah, the as you were saying just before we started recording, the voice is this invisible instrument that is inside of us, and it's so difficult to explain sometimes how somebody should do things differently, that going by that feeling and trying to explain that feeling was much easier than something more technical or theoretical.
Mhm.
So I actually was a vocal coach for over a year, and that actually taught me as a singer a lot of things too, because I saw
Oh, yeah.
reflected in my students have things that I couldn't do better myself. And those are very nice memories that I still cherish. But notation was never part of that teaching method, and it felt that it fit with me and with the people who attended those classes, because they knew what were getting into as well, and they were so different than my private singing lessons as well. The lessons that I had throughout my life were mostly operatic singing,
Mhm.
and that was always from this also gatekeepy elitist kind of
Oh
perspective
god,
of
yeah.
opera is the only right way, and this is the
Right.
only thing you have to learn, and this is how you do it. That also gave me a lot of anxiety maybe, and even fear. Nowadays I would love to learn how to scream and growl and do distorted vocals,
Mhm.
and I'm terrified that I will hurt myself.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so much for being able to relate to your story. And also, yes, I think a lot of learning is achieved just by doing and trying things out. So, this one holy grail of learning is really non existent.
Mhm. Yeah, it's all about individualization, I think. That's my philosophy on learning at least, or on teaching, that is. But yeah, there's nothing like being a teacher to show you what you can do better, I think. You're
Sure.
teaching somebody and you're like, "Oh, I do that." I really should I'm telling this person that they should probably try differently, and I do that thing, so maybe I should try differently too, you know?
Yes.
But yeah, that's, teaching is great. I actually it's kinda similar how I got my first teaching gig is I
Mhm.
didn't have a job, and I needed a job, and I saw an ad for a vocal teacher, and I applied for it, and I'd never taught piano because I didn't feel I was a good piano player because I couldn't read music, you know? And, I applied for this vocal teacher gig because my primary instrument that I considered to be my primary instrument is vocals, and they were like I applied for the singing or the vocal teacher gig, and they're like, "Okay, you teach piano for us too now," pretty much. Like, that's a
Okay.
highly condensed version of it, and I was like, what? I'm not a piano player, like, what are you talking about?" But, so I can relate to that on some levels, you know, it's like a just do it mentality, and I was like, "I guess I teach piano now," and, you know, now I've been teaching piano for several years, and, you know, I'm like, "Okay, I guess I play piano now." Like, it's interesting to kinda, like and I work with students on this too, of, like, people being like, "Oh, you know, I'm not a piano player, I'm not a singer," you know, and, like, the
Mhm.
self-identity of
Yeah.
what you are, you know, it's like if you do it, you are it, you know, it's part of that gatekeeping mentality of, like, unless you have a degree in it, unless you are a professional, like, what qualifies you as a profession what qualifies you as you know what I mean? Like, nothing.
Right.
You qualify yourself as that, you know, and I mean, I think that some people see it as, like, trying not to be disrespectful to people that are doing this as a career, but I think that a lot of the time, I won't say most of the time, but I think that a lot of the time people hesitate to say that they do a thing. Like, I know I have students that are in bands that are out
Mhm.
gigging. I mean, like, mostly pre-pandemic, but, you know,
Mhm.
um, that are performing, actively performing for money and doing stuff that still are like, "Oh, you know, but
A
I'm not really
professional.
a professional singer." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Why? Because you're not famous? Like, what level is it gonna take for you to
Yeah.
consider yourself a musician?" You
Mhm.
know, and it's interesting to kind of help people break down those walls that just the general toxicity of music culture has built up, you know?
Yes, and it's also so weird to have that emerge from something so subjective as
Mhm.
music. What makes good music is just different for every listener, and yeah, it's an art. It's just very difficult to put a qualifier on it or to put a grade on it.
Right.
I don't know. I've always had that kind of disconnection there as well. But it all comes from this, as I was saying before, very archaic in my eyes educational system that applies to obviously all of the subjects, but that has been prevalent throughout history. I don't think it has ever been completely abolished and thought anew.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and with that, I think we can dive in maybe a little bit into the history of music because the access to the information it's something that has been very guarded and reserved for highly powerful and or religious people, and well, both of those combined a lot, and that left a lot of women on the outside. One of my idols forever has been Hildegard von Bingen,
Mhm.
and she was, well, she later became a saint even. She was a German abbess apparently, and she was a writer and composer and philosopher, and even a medical writer and practitioner. So I have a book by her which is about fasting for healing your own body and
Mhm.
about eating the right medicinal plants and all of that. But she also wrote amazing chorals and hymns and other kind of religious music. And she got to be this amazing musician and amazing scientist, even because she had the access to that education because she was religious.
Right.
So that was her privilege, of course, away from the privilege that she was, white German woman.
Right, right. I think that the relationship between medicine and music not needs to be, but I think it's wonderful that she had that as somebody who is also interested in both medicine and music because, like,
Hmm.
I teach from a well, not always. Like I said, it's an individualized approach, but like when it works for the student, I like to teach from an anatomical and musical perspective. So like
Awesome.
especially for voice students, for example, like I've got, like, diagrams of the larynx and stuff like that so that you can understand. I usually just call it, like, "your structures," quote, unquote,
Mhm.
but, like, just meaning, like, the parts of your body that are doing the things that cause sound to happen in that way,
Mhm.
because kinda like what you were saying before, it's hard to, make a thing happen with something that you can't see and you
Yeah.
can't necessarily feel because like, the motions are so small. So, like, to see somebody way, way back in history, who was
Mhm.
also both a medical, expert essentially, and also a
Yes.
musical expert, I think that that's really amazing, because like, like personally, I went to college, right, and I was a triple major dual matriculation, right, pre-med, pre-vet, and opera, and then or it was voice. I can't remember what my actual degree name was now.
Mhm.
And I
Awesome.
remember my advisor and them sending me in to go talk to people and being like, "No one in the history of this college has ever attempted these degrees. Like, you're never gonna make it." And like, then like I dropped out and being like, "Well, I guess they were right." You know what I
Oh.
mean? But like thinking that like this is not unheard of. This has been
Yeah.
done. Like this is something that like you know this person. What when was she born? Do you know?
The year 1098. That is
Right.
exactly what I was about to say. It has been almost 1,000 years.
Exactly. There is historical precedent for this. Like, this is not
Yes.
something that is unheard of.
Mhm.
In fact, there's a lot of, I think that there's a lot to be said for the medical and, or I guess anatomical, maybe might be the right, but like anatomical, physiological, kinesthesiology side, and
Mhm.
also the music side being put together, as is evidenced, right? Way back in history.
Yeah, and that also just made me think of that should be like the basis of how we could make teaching vocals more inclusive, just
Hmm.
having the starting point be every person's body that is different.
Individual bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Because then
And
it's not a one size fits all approach, you know?
exactly. And also it's not this whole categories of the different vocals and
Exactly.
what is a soprano and I don't even remember the others, but
Right. Which, like, also helps us be less of, like, like, cis normative structure,
Mhm.
which
Exactly.
is something that is, in my opinion, a little bit, like, we could move past that.
Yeah.
Like, we don't need that anymore. That, like, but, and I could go on for days about that, so I'm gonna stop there. But,
No, go on.
well, just the way that, that structuring vocal types by gender is really
Yeah.
not necessary, I
Mhm.
mean, like, gender is expansive, we know that, those of us who are paying attention and listening to other humans and,
Mhm.
setting our own, agendas aside because why would we need to ever tell somebody else what their own feelings about themselves are? And I know that there
Mhm.
are those of us, particularly in America, who, feel the need to do that quite strongly and quite often, but, I think that, like, people who are maybe, how do I say this, like, politely, but, who will, like, believe in progressive ideals and, like, are respectful of other people would agree that gender can be expansive.
Mhm.
Gender is expansive, so, like, why are we relegating vocal music into, like, 2 parts are for women, 2 parts are for men, and that's it. You know,
Yeah.
like, it's very constricting. So, like, if we look at voices like, your instrument is unique to your
Mhm.
unique human, and I think that people might look at that, if you're looking at it closed-mindedly and be like, "What a slippery slope, that must be so hard, we can't define it then." Well, you don't need to. You look at a piece of music,
Yeah.
it's got a range, you look at that range, it's from, C3 to E5. Can the person who's trying to sing this song sing those notes? Great,
Mhm.
sing that song. And you don't
Yeah.
have to use scientific pitch notation, you can just sing through the song and figure out if you can sing the notes, like, it's you know what I mean? Like, you don't it doesn't have to be through, like, the traditional, quote, unquote, like, "westernized" music teachings ways of doing it. It can be through however you understand music to be, and just
Mhm.
figure out whether or not you can sing the song. You don't have to do it through standardized voice types that are intrinsically linked to gender and therefore gender roles, because that's how
Mhm.
we as a global society have decided that we're gonna enforce that.
Yes.
You
And
know?
opening up that door, I
Yeah.
think the possibilities then are endless.
Mhm. Absolutely, because like the if we were, I think if we were less strict about it, it might be fine. Just keep soprano, alto, tenor, bass, even including like coloratura and all those like subcategories of
The mezzos.
exactly. Because like for example, I could sing really high when I was studying opera and they were like, "Okay, you will only ever be considered for like ingenue, like helpless woman roles because you can sing really
Right.
high." And I was like, "Well, that's cool and all, but I can also sing all the way through, contralto type of like range as
Hmm.
well. I'd
Yeah,
love to go for a pants role sometime because I don't identify as female. That would be really nice for me." And they were like, "No." Like, "No, because you got the upper range and that's not like that common, you're gonna be always only offered like womeny, like really, really like and like that gross kind of like um traditional gender role type of like helpless woman roles." And I
damsel
was
in
like,
distress. Yeah.
Exactly, damsel in distress, and I was like, "This just doesn't seem right to me, like, why is this just decided for a
Hmm.
professional singer?" Like,
Yeah.
and I'm sure this was, quite a few years ago now, so I'm sure that some things have changed since then, but it seemed inaccurate in terms of how things are decided to me, like, we could probably do better about that.
Definitely. And there is a lot of language that's just, I always talk about how powerful language can be and how important it is that we change it and that we make it more inclusive. And
Mhm,
I think English just has the easiest choices with the singular they, them, and also being able to speak about a non specific person as one.
yeah,
Spanish and German, which are my other languages, they don't just have that. And
mhm,
so I do think that societies that have those as a mother tongue just have a more difficult time with these concepts
mhm,
of gender and being able to disconnect that from the language or from the things that they are trying to say. It's funny because it also occurs to me that I am learning Finnish, and in Finnish, the third person is actually gender neutral, and so
hmm,
they for them it's just way easier. And I always wonder if that also has really played an important part in their development, of a more gender neutral and inclusive, equal
mhm.
society.
Yeah, interesting. The
Yes.
thing about systems of oppression is, to me at least, I've never encountered a system of oppression that was not intersectional. So, like, maybe I'll find one eventually, but I have not encountered one yet. So, with the development of standardized piano key sizes, which may not be something that you're familiar with, I don't know, but like
Hmm.
piano keys sizes, like the width of piano keys has not always been the size that they are today. Um,
Hmm.
is based off of like everything from like sexism to racism to ableism. Like it's like everything is involved. And I could rant about this for like ever for like an hour, but I would love to touch on that if we have time.
Yes.
Okay. So the piano as we know it, like the modern piano, was developed after like the harpsichord and the clavichord. I think it was after the
Hmm.
clavichord. I don't know. Nobody fact check me on that. I could be wrong. But it was like in the early 1700s. And originally there were multiple different sizes of keyboards, right? Because like any instrument, if you think about it, or it sometimes can be helpful to think about it in terms of like sports. Like
Hmm.
people have different sizes of shoes because they have different sizes of feet, right?
Yes.
And that makes sense, right? But different sizes of keyboards, people have different sizes of hands, and so it makes sense to have different sizes of keyboards, right? And so I'm just gonna like give a brief history of pianos because it is relevant here, okay?
Yes, please. If I may interrupt you for 1 second before we go forward, because we were also talking about this other historical figure in music, and she is from the 1700s,
Yeah, absolutely.
and she played the harpsichord
Perfect.
and was an amazing musician, player, and performer. And her name is Maria Anna Mozart.
Oh yes, right.
I just I was just talking about this because I saw a video on Instagram the other day, and it was just I mean, it was obvious, but at the same time it blew my mind. So Mozart's sister Mariana and or Marianne, as people called her. She was born in 1751, and it is said that she was as good or maybe even better than Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, her more famous brother. And she just at some point just had to leave her musical career because she had to get married and have kids. Anyway, she played the harpsichord, and people, or she gets overlooked a lot in classical history.
Yeah, well, and I saw a thing when we were talking about Mozart's sister where, like, Mozart himself, like, had written that she was better than him, like, he had written something about, like, "My sister who has all the talent," and things like that, and, like,
Hmm.
yet still, and, like, I had not even heard of Mozart's sister until literally today,
Yeah,
which is just, absolutely wild to me, that, that you would think that somebody like myself who's actually interested in finding out about these figures in history who have just been overlooked, forgotten, not discussed, and I hadn't even heard about the sister of like you ask people who have no interest about classical music, like, oh, who's your favorite classical musician, right? And people are just like Mozart, which is totally fine, like not a dig at all, but like
hmm,
he's like one of the people that if people know no classical musicians, he's a name that they know, and
yeah,
yet his sister nobody's heard of her, right? And
exactly.
apparently she's just a masterful musician, it's just very interesting, right?
Yeah, and I think that the story goes that growing up, they attended the same lessons. They were given like the same opportunities, and there was just this point where he had the advantage just by being born male to
Mhm.
go on and pursue this whole career that made him obviously historically and world famous, and she was left behind in his shadow.
Yeah, well, and that totally tracks with, like, where what I'm about to say too about, pianos because
Hmm.
and I mean, like, I don't know the history for sure with harpsichord, but with piano, like, in the 18th and 19th century, um, people like, only the wealthy could afford pianos, and it was kind of like
Yeah.
a fancy furniture piece in some ways because, like,
Hmm.
they're made out of fancy materials, they look nice, etcetera, etcetera. And it was a status symbol to be able to have a piano, and wealthy families would
Hmm.
hire, like, these traveling like, masterful musicians to come and, like, teach their children how to play piano, and they would usually teach the daughters, which is interesting, because we're talking about, sexism partially here, and of course,
Hmm.
in all of these examples that we're talking about, the research, even nowadays, like we completely gloss over the trans community completely because, like, we just
Yeah.
in research, we just act like trans people don't exist because largely they were either,
Mm.
not out with their families or just not acknowledged. Like families would
Hmm.
hide their trans children or just not acknowledge their existence. So, like, when I say like daughters versus sons, we're talking about people not acknowledging their trans kids, which I just feel is important to say currently
Yeah.
given the climate that's going on.
And also, just to complete that thought, history is always written from this very male and white perspective. So
Exactly.
while we talk about people having pianos in their homes and everything, we are also talking about people who are mostly white and could afford
Exactly.
those
Yes.
because obviously the rest of the population, the people of color, didn't have access to that at all.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. I should have said that. Definitely wealthy white families that are having pianos in
Hmm.
their homes, and they would have these traveling musicians like teach their daughters predominantly. But women were not allowed to pursue music as a career. So like
Hmm.
they would have people teach their children, their daughters. Sometimes sons were allowed, but like women were basically just supposed to learn piano as a flirtation piece maybe so that
Hmm.
they would be more attractive to suitors. But
Hmm.
if they learned piano to the level that they would maybe pursue it as a career, it was like, "No, no, you can't do that. That's not
Yeah.
allowed. Only men are allowed to be professional musicians, not women." Which is like,
Hmm.
okay, whatever. Like, when I did some of this research, I was just like blown away, right? So men are allowed to be professional musicians, women are not. Now, in the
Hmm.
in the early to mid 1800s is when like the romantic virtuosos were like the big deal rock stars of the era, right? So we're talking like Chopin, Liszt. Sorry, I almost said Liszt.
Hmm.
But like they were just like absolutely people were going crazy over these guys, and they would be requiring larger and larger venues to satisfy the crowds that were coming to see. And I mean, like it wasn't just those two; they're just the big names that people think about. Where they were also like I'm trying to think, like, Verdi was a big deal in that period of time, and, like, Puccini, and, I don't know why I'm only thinking of the Italian composers right now, but there was, like there there was a lot of other, like, virtuosic performers, but the top 2 on piano were Chopin and Liszt.
Mhm.
But, uh so in order to accommodate larger performance halls, they started making, like, larger pianos, right? Well, these
Mm,
2 virtuosic romantic composers and performers, Chopin and Liszt, they're
yeah.
both white cis men, right?
Mhm.
And they fit pianos that were a certain size. Their hands did. And of course, what else is a big deal when you've got 2 guys that are, like, big rock star guys? Competition, right?
Yeah.
Other people are interested in being, like, as good as them. They're competing with each other. So everything needs to be, and it starts building up this point, it's, or at least competition does, like, people wanna be really good, they wanna show that they're as good as these guys, so it starts making sense to have all the standard, or the pianos be standardized, right? Because then it's
Mhm.
"fair," quote, unquote.
Oh, right. Mhm.
I mean, it's fair if you have the same size hands as
Yeah.
Chopin and Liszt do, which, like, I don't know why I keep saying Liszt when his name is Liszt, but we'll just go with that pronunciation right now, 'cause
Yes.
apparently it's too early in the morning and I haven't had enough coffee yet. But, the fairness argument, right? If you think about it, it's kind of like, in many ways, going back to the sports analogy, right? If you have and I am not a sports person, so I'm just gonna make a complete fool of myself for a second, but let's say you have, like, a 2-foot hurdle that you have to jump over. I don't know if 2
Mhm.
feet is a reasonable, hurdle or not. Maybe that's, like, really low. I don't care. So let's say that your hurdle that you
Same.
need to jump over is 2 feet. I don't know. And your legs are, like, you're, like, 5 feet tall, and your legs are, like, I don't know, 3 feet long or whatever. I don't know human proportions in this way. But, like, you're gonna be at a disadvantage compared to somebody who's, like, 6.5 feet tall, whose
Yeah.
legs are way longer than you, right? But, like, the
Mhm.
hurdle is at the same height regardless
Mhm.
because of fairness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, even in sports, like, that's not really fair either, but people, like, think it's fair, so it's kinda the same thing on pianos.
Mhm.
And even currently, like, to this day, the vast, vast majority of people who win piano competitions are white men
Mhm.
still, like, white cis men. And, I looked up some really interesting statistics that have been put out by there's an organization called Pianists for Alternative Sized Keyboards. I think it's PASK. I'm not sure if they call it PASK or just PASK.
Okay.
And they did a study on hand sizes. So the benchmark hand span, which I call wingspan, but basically it's if you stretch your hand out from your pinky to your thumb,
Mhm.
um, for playing most classical music comfortably is 8.5 inches. All right.
Let me look those up in metric.
I'm so sorry.
21 centimeters seems like a lot.
Yeah, right. Because the composers were cis white men. That's a lot of it. All
Mhm.
right. So my
Yeah.
personal hand span, okay, like myself, is 7.25 inches, like at best, on my hand that has a larger hand span. So that's like 18.4
Mhm. That's a
centimeters.
difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't even have that. I have small hands though. I found a study that was talking about, like, grip strength difficulties for surgeons, because you can't really find that much data on, like, hand span because people don't
Mhm.
study that, because who cares about piano players apparently. But I'm kidding mostly. But the hand span, or the hand length of, like, the average, American male is 202 millimeters, so that's, like, 20.2 centimeters, is that
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Whereas the average hand length of the average, I just said average twice, I'm sorry, of, the average Japanese female is 175.4 millimeters, excuse me, I'm being so American right now. That's like a full, like, centimeter and a half difference between an average American man, and the average Japanese woman.
Mhm.
And the thing that's really interesting here is that you can actually retrofit a piano with a smaller keyboard. It's not difficult. Like, the PASK, the PASK organization,
Mhm.
has been, advocating for different sized keyboards forever, and it's not to make competitions more fair. It's to avoid injury, because when you have to
Mhm.
stretch your hand out too far, you're far, far more likely to be injured.
Yeah.
Like, sure, I'm sure some of it is for competition purposes, but honestly, like, when I teach children, especially, and this is what really got me interested in this, is like a child typically cannot reach an octave with
Yeah.
their hand. And like a lot of music, you're going to be wanting to do octaves in, which an octave is just like from one note to another note. Do you mind if I play that so that people can hear what I'm saying?
Go ahead.
Okay, so like an octave sounds like this. Like that's an octave.
Hmm.
So one note and then to the same note, but higher by 8 notes essentially. Um, And if a kid's trying to play that, they're gonna, like, stretch their hands really, really hard, and that puts a ton of stress on the tendons, it puts stress actually on
Hmm.
the bones even to do that, and doing that
Wow.
over and over again can cause injury, can cause,
Yeah.
overdue strain. There were even devices, like, back in the day in history that would I remember seeing a picture of one that, like, had, like, little loops that you would put around your fingers, and they would stretch your fingers, and people would I remember seeing a article about that device and that some pianist, like rising star pianist, had used it to try to stretch his fingers out, and he permanently damaged his hands and couldn't play piano
Ouch.
anymore. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly, it's terrible. And people do this to try to get, an edge, whether it's competitively or whether it's to be a better piano player, or they
Hmm.
practice too much and they cause injury to their hands when really we could probably solve the problem by having, reasonable keyboards that suit people's needs,
Yes.
and it's not just a gender and race issue, it's also an ableism issue. I mean, there are several conditions that can cause brachydactyly, which is
Hmm.
like shortened fingers and hands and toes and feet.
Hmm.
Whether I know that two common ones are Cushing syndrome and Down syndrome can both cause like shortening of the hands and fingers and toes and feet. And
Hmm.
like, for that, why should people who have differences in their finger length not be able to have access to smaller keyboards, and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff? And it's sort of like any other accommodation, like, it shouldn't have to be a big deal. And that's
Exactly.
another thing with my approach as a teacher is kind of, we at least I know in America, we kinda make things out as like, "Oh, well, if you really need something to be different, you should have to go through all these hoops to jump through." Like, I recently applied for an accommodation through my school because I have chronic migraines, and I go to an
Hmm.
online school, so I was just asking to wear a different pair of toned glasses so that I
Hmm.
wouldn't get migraines when I take online tests, right? And they went through this whole system, right, to, where I had to, like, prove all this stuff, and I sent them a letter that said the exact accommodation that I needed, and I still had to meet for 45 minutes with somebody to ask if I'd tried all these other things and, yeah, all
Yeah.
this stuff, and I was like, "This is ridiculous." Like,
Yeah.
all I'm asking for is something very simple, and I'm hugely privileged that I can self-advocate for this,
Hmm.
and I feel very similarly about this keyboard issue is, like, nobody's, like, getting an unfair advantage or taking advantage of a system somehow
Yeah.
by asking for a keyboard size that will allow them to play their instrument without harm, you
Yes.
know? Like, we as a music community should probably, in my opinion, maybe should shy away from, like we were saying before, gatekeeping and being, like, strict and saying, like, "Oh, everybody should have to play on the same thing," because equality, quote, unquote, in that way is not equitable.
Yes.
But there's my soapbox. I'll get off of it now.
No, that is amazing because that also makes me think of if I want to play an instrument, I shouldn't need to get one custom made to my size,
Exactly, and you
right?
don't. You can buy a regular keyboard, digital or, like a digital keyboard or an acoustic piano, and it can be retrofit with different
Hmm.
sizes of keyboards. Like, that is totally possible, and we just
That is
don't do it
awesome.
most of the time. There have been some, like, competitions and stuff that recently, like, in the last 2 years or 3 years, have started to implement stuff like this, but it's very rare still.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking about other instruments. As I said in the beginning, I don't play any, but I do know that there are small size guitars for children, for example.
Mhm, yeah.
I'm just wondering, why is that then not done in for other instruments or in other areas?
I don't know all of the instruments, like, I know a lot more about my instrument than I do about a lot of
Hmm.
others. But I know that, like, violins come in different sizes, but, I don't know how well those standard sizes work for everyone. Like, I'd be
Hmm.
interested in talking to somebody whose primary instrument is violin and who is,
Yeah.
like, an inclusivity advocate, to discuss, like, I think that it's, like, a quarter, half, 3 quarters, and full, maybe. Don't quote me. I would fact check myself on that.
Hmm.
But, like, do those are those 4 sizes inclusive enough,
Hmm.
or do we need custom sizing? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know that guitars come in different sizes, and I don't really know that much more than just that they come in different sizes. Mandolins also come in different sizes, I believe. I don't know about brass or anything like that. I used to play French horn, like, years ago, but not well. And
Hmm.
I don't know about sizing on that, but, and this is gonna be a hugely, like, I'm sure a radical claim, but, like, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of instruments were made for the cis white male body. Because, if you think about it, like, again, from this research that I was doing about pianos, like, the idea of musical instruments being gendered started
Hmm.
in, like, the 1500s. Women and people perceived as women, I guess, would probably be the
Hmm.
best way to say it. But, people who identify as women, if they were able to pass, but, were encouraged to only play instruments that were considered proper for them. Like, some of the wording is laughable, actually.
Hmm.
I'll pull some of it up for you, and then you can laugh and cry with me about this because some of it's terrible. This is a quote from a thing in 1528. All right. Imagine how unlovely it would be to see a woman play the drums, fifes, or trumpets, or other like instruments, and this because their harshness hides and destroys the mild gentleness which so much adorns every act that a woman does. Like,
Ah!
they're just
Ah!
terrible. They're awful. The harpsichord, spinet, lute, and bass and violin are instruments most agreeable to ladies. There are some that are really unbecoming to the fair sex, as the flute, violin, hot boy, I don't actually know what that is, the last of which is too manlike, with a capital M, by the way, manlike,
Uh-huh.
um, would look indecent in a woman's mouth, as the flute is very improper. Taking
Wow.
away yeah, it's really incredible how deeply people went into this, you
Yeah.
know? I read something about, like, that playing a cello would be indecent because the woman would have to straddle her legs around the cello, and, like,
Right.
and so for the history of instruments, people said, "Oh, a woman cannot put her mouth to an instrument because it's indecent and improper and, she can't move her body in certain ways because not only is she physically too weak to do so, but also it would be too wild in movement, and all of these things." And so I imagine that because this was what was believed, that they
Mhm.
constructed these instruments to fit the bodies of the people they considered it proper for these instruments to be played by.
Yeah.
So, are cellos made to fit male hands and male bodies, like white male hands and white male bodies? Because, of course, like we said before, these were not available to people of color. Um, or or what? Like, I'd like to do some more digging into this and find it out.
Hell yes. I was thinking a little bit about how mind blowing it would be for the author of that piece to see women rocking world stages
Right?
nowadays. I had
Right?
to think about a live performance by the Linda Lindas. I don't know if you've heard about them, but it's a US American band. It's for young women,
Mhm.
and they are incredible. And they play this feminist punk.
Nice.
I mean, it is 2022, but at such a young age, it's just admirable. And I'm going to link it in the description of the podcast. But it's just really, really cool, and I enjoyed watching them very much.
I love that. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. So, yes, we have intertwined our critique of the music development throughout the ages with our versions of how we could make things better. So, how about we just summarize all that again and end on that positive note of how we can make music education a more inclusive place?
Yeah, well, I think that in order to make music education more inclusive, I think that we really need to focus on the student rather than on the kind of like we were saying earlier,
On the theory or the method. Hmm.
exactly, on
Hmm.
standardization, like putting standardization aside and focusing more on the individual student's needs.
Hell yeah. That is wisdom of the day for sure. And it's also obviously difficult because not everybody has access to personal private lessons. We are talking about, I think maybe the only thing speaking for standardization is the possibility to teach groups and or larger groups of people, and not having to
Mhm.
focus on each individual's needs and skill set. But that is actually that is exactly what is wrong with education in general, right? We have schools, having problems dealing with people with ADHD and or people who just have a more visual learning than I don't know. Memorizing everything is not the solution to how we learn
Mhm.
things. I would add to that my everlasting plead of changing the language we teach things in, or we speak in general, and making that even more neutral, and as you were saying in the beginning, considering the expansiveness and or the gender spectrum that we are
Mhm.
hearing more and more about nowadays, because we really should go away from this binary and just adapt to each person being different in every way, in every possible way.
One other thing about teaching, I think that would be important, and I know it doesn't seem possible a lot of times to small businesses, but maybe um, being a small business owner myself, one thing to bake in would be allowing for and making sure to, with intentionality, including whether it be sliding scale or offering free resources or ways to make music education
Hmm.
accessible. Because I think that a lot of people focus on like too much on standardization and also too much on profiting from
Yeah.
music education. Because like, yes, of course, we all have to make a living. Yes, that's super important. I'm not diminishing that in any way. But if that's all we're focusing on, I think that we lose sight of what's like music can be critical. Music can be life and death for some people.
Yes.
I think that that may sound like an exaggeration, but I know people that have a song that saved their
Hmm.
life on a time when they were in a really dark place. And, if teaching music is that important, to some of these, or learning music is that important to some people, like try to find a way, whether it's by supporting it with another side gig, like not necessarily just you working a side gig,
Hmm.
but something else that can support your industry or your business being able to offer free or reduced cost lessons or free resources that people can learn on their own, with a YouTube channel or something like that that offers like free lessons or something, where it's not just if you can't pay, you're out of luck.
Yeah.
I think that that's a really important thing, as well as treating your instructors well, making sure that you find good people that really know how to do that individualization in learning or in teaching, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? And treating them right so that you don't lose them. Because I think that's that one thing that people don't like. I've worked at
Hmm.
franchises and stuff like that for music lessons, and I don't know how it is where you are, but like as I'm sure is a reputation in America, like we're all about paying people very little and expecting a lot of them,
Yeah.
but like treating people right, treating your students right, treating your teachers right, like I think that's a really important thing, that what all the way up the chain, from the smallest mom and pop shop, music teaching organization, all the way up through higher
Yeah.
ed music education. I think that's something that we could all improve on, treating people right.
Yes. Yes, that is very important. And of course, that applies to, I think, to every other aspect of our lives as well, to just treat people with respect and kindness, even. Also, what has become a thing also in recent years is to learn everything through YouTube,
Mhm.
especially in music. And I think that is very, very practical. But that
Mhm.
would also be, digital standardization, even.
Right. Yeah,
I think the human contact is very important, and also the feedback,
absolutely.
just to get advice on how to improve yourself. No YouTube video is going to tell you what you're doing wrong specifically and how you could get better. So that is very important. And also, yeah, just the human touch of everything with that in art is very special. And what you were saying before as well, sometimes music lessons can be therapy and can be therapeutic and can help a lot with mental health, which is something that we talk about a lot on this podcast. And also, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And so, if going to that a music
Hmm.
lesson once a week, once every 2 weeks, yes, music can save lives and change lives. And that is why it is important that we give everybody a chance to tell their stories through music. And going back to what I was
Yeah.
about to say before, diversity in every industry is really, really important because people are just from their different lens and their different perspective on life. There comes unique music in this case, or unique art and unique creation. And that is, for example, the case for the last of the figures that we looked up in preparation for the podcast, who composed the score to Clockwork Orange, A Clockwork Orange, and The Shining, as well as Tron. And her name is Wendy Carlos, who was actually a trans woman and raised a public awareness of transgender issues in 1979. So that it is just so important to see all of these figures, and these are just some very little examples, but we have been unique and different for thousands and thousands of years, and it's time for us to just see that and make each other's unique names more visible, because it enriches our lives and our
Hmm.
music and everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be all for today. But we've been ending the episodes lately by asking each other what you're listening to. So, do you want to share what's on your record player and/or streaming platform?
Oh goodness, I have been listening to a lot of classic soul lately.
Hmm.
So like Aretha Franklin, Otis Redding, like that kind of stuff right now.
Ooh, nice,
Yeah.
cool.
That tends to be pretty standard, to be honest with you. Like I'm usually always listening to that kind of stuff,
Hmm.
but I recently went on a road trip and we made a like super long playlist and it had a lot of good old music on it.
Oh, that's lovely. That is really nice. Well, from the bit of a heavier side, I just discovered an amazing cover of Muse's Stockholm Syndrome by Era.
Mm,
I didn't
very
know of the
cool.
band, and it was just amazing. So I've been listening to that song specifically for a few days now, almost on repeat. And also, what I will link in the show notes, the Linda Lindas. It's a Tiny Desk performance.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to check that out.
Hell yeah. Thank you so very much for all of your words of wisdom and insight and sharing your story with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
We have been trying to get you to
I
get to
know
have
it's
this conversation
it's been
finally
so
for a
long. I'm
while.
sorry.
No, 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 never sorry. It's been fine. But it was just something that yeah, we mentioned briefly or you mentioned it very briefly at some point on one of your streams on Twitch, and it just caught my attention, and I really, really, really wanted to have this conversation, and it paid off. So, thank you so very much again. Tell us where people can find you on the internet.
Yes. So I am on Twitch at oh goodness, is it twitch.tv? Is that the end
Yeah.
of Twitch?
Hmm.
Okay, yeah. So it's twitch.tv/sarcastic_fingers. And then that's kind of my primary right now, to be honest. But the music school that is it all right if I promote
Yeah,
the
of
music
course.
school? Okay. So the music school that I founded and I also teach at is called Fractal School of Music, and our website is www.fractalschoolofmusic.com. And those are kind of the two big things that I do.
Awesome. Do you also teach online?
Yeah, that's through Fractal. Yeah, so we schedule like our lessons and stuff online. It's all online, so you can sign up from anywhere in the world, pretty much. We've got students actually all over the place.
Perfect. I will link all of that as well in the description of the episode. And you can follow the Bleeding Metal podcast on Spotify and Stitcher, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now. We'd be super grateful for your reviews, and, just tell a friend. Tell them how useful and interesting this episode was. And or let us know what whether you fact checked us and and have some corrections. I'm open to that. It's fine. We are at Bleeding Metal Pod on Instagram. That's where we are most active right now, and otherwise you know where to find us. Thank you so very much, Sebastian. It was really a lot of fun to have you here. Thank you so very much.
It was great to be here. Thank you.
And thanks everybody for listening until the end. Have a great rest of your weeks and days, or whenever you're listening to this. And yeah, we'll see and or hear each other next month. Thank you.